This is TWiT.
Guys, this is interesting because we just got through the news cycle about the GDPR. That's the General Data Protection Regulations that they passed and are finally enforcing in the EU. Well, this is sort of a mini GDPR, and we were wondering how quickly it would start to make its rounds of U.S. politics and U.S. legislation. Well, that didn't take long at all. Now, this thing was designed to do three things, and it's actually a pretty well-written bill. It's 1798, which is the act number, and it does first ownership. And the ownership component is really comprised of two things. First, the right to know what personal information is being collected, and then secondly, the right to know whether that personal information is being sold or disclosed and to whom. And I think that second part is the important piece because we all know our information is being collected. But if you now have the right to petition a company and say, who are you selling it to and have you sold it yet? That's very important. The second part is control. And again, this is comprised of two pieces. The first is the right to say no to the sale of personal information. Now, we kind of had this at the end of the previous administration. The FCC had put into play some legislation, some rules that stopped ISPs from selling your data without getting your opt-in. This reinstates it, but on a state level. Essentially, it says an ISP has to ask you first before they can sell or market your information. The second part is the right to equal service and price. And that is, they've thought a little bit ahead, and they've said if you opt out, you cannot be penalized. If you decide that you don't want to share your data, the ISP can't suddenly say, well, okay, we're going to charge you more per month. That's a very interesting sort of wrinkle on that. The third part is security, and again, has two pieces. Piece 112 is that a business that suffers a breach of security of the system, and then they define it, shall be penalized. And essentially, it allows two types of penalties. First, from the user, a user can sue for up to $1,000 or actual damages if it's more. And a business itself can be fined about $75,000 for every violation. So there are teeth to this. It's not as much as the GDPR, but it's definitely not a slap on the wrist. This wouldn't be Yahoo losing 1 billion emails and then getting hit by a $50,000 fine. Now, I want to open this up to you because let's put aside the fact that it's a state law or a state act right now. As they've spelled it out, and as you've heard me explain the three major components of the CCPA, does this make sense? Do you think this is a good response to a GDPR-like act? Lou, let's start with you.
So I think, I think it doesn't kind of go towards GDPR. Like, it doesn't wrap all of GDPR's usages. Like, I think if you think about GDPR, it's anything that leaves your machine, any type of information that leaves your machine that can be, used at any point in time, whether it's personal identifiable information or not. If it can be used later to put together to identify you as, who you are and what you're doing and what you're made of and your information, then it's considered part of GDPR. And I think that is like one of its defining factors that are kind of differentiate here is the fact that, this particular one doesn't wrap around the fact that some information can be put together later on to actually identify you. And that information can then be sent to advertisers and so on. So even if they collect it in different pieces, they can almost work around this particular Privacy Act. So I think, that's where GDPR kind of trumps this particular scenario, I think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And now, the other part about this is Chibert, I'd like you to take a look at how it's actually trying to protect your data. So it's not prohibiting the sale of the data. It's not prohibiting the collection. It's just saying you have to opt in. You have to get the opt-in of your user, of your consumer, before you sell or market it. And it's also saying that the consumer has the right to both say no and to know to whom you're selling the information. That's actually a big sticking point. Many of the companies who are objecting to this are okay with consumers having a little bit of rights, but they don't want to disclose who they're selling the information to. Why do you think that is?
Because it's hard to keep track of. Okay, I think that's really and truly the bottom line. It means you're going to be obligated to track it. You're going to be obligated to protect it. And that's going to be a real bummer. And you know what? That's going to be tough to do in this day and age. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see an absolute explosion in blockchain. In fact, here we go. I'm trying to find. I scheduled an episode with a blockchain integrator, and I can't find it right now. But that's going to be it. Right now, like FERPA requires we have to go through an annual audit. We have to go audit all our machines, find PII, financial information, things like that. This kind of law is going to take that a lot further. And blockchain, I think, in my mind, blockchain is one of the few technologies that might actually work, especially because consumers are going to want to be able to go and confirm all this. So blockchain is going to explode, and Ajit Pai, beware what you wish for.
Right. Curtis, we have to be very careful with this because it's very, very easy for us to look at this and say, oh, this is just corporations acting badly. But I think Tjibert started to allude to this, which is it's not necessarily because they've got nefarious intent for the information. It's just this law could make it very difficult for them to do business and difficult to do business in a single state. What's your take?
Well, I'll take it farther than Tjibert did on two levels. And the first and most important is that if something like this goes through, if enforced strictly, it basically breaks the business model of the web as we know it today.
Right.
And one of the reasons is that it's not just that keeping up with who they've sold personal identification or personal information to be would be difficult for many of these companies. It's that they don't know. What a lot of people don't realize is that there are advertising networks that sell the ads that pop up on your websites. And the networks sell the ads from, they're intermediaries. So they take the space that's available on Facebook, on Google, on any number of other sites. They sell it to the individual advertisers. But here's the thing. Often the company that they sell it to will be another network and another network. So what you have not infrequently is a company advertising to a Facebook or a Google or some other customer or user that is 5, 6, or 7 layers removed from that company. And so it's not just that Facebook would have difficulty keeping track of who it's selling the ultimate information to, it's that they have no way of knowing. And that's one of both the dirty secrets of modern web commerce and the source of one of the incredible privacy and security holes around the web. We have built this giant privacy sieve into the web commerce model, and there's really no way to fix it without completely reordering things. That's one of many reasons that companies have been so utterly freaked out about GDPR, and why many of these big companies are sort of waiting with bated breath to see who the first big enforcement action is going to be against.
Right. Yeah. And see, here's the thing. Normally, I kind of like whenever you rein in corporate power because corporations have tended to do things that are very anti-consumer. However, I actually kind of fall on their side for the reasons that Curtis and Tjibert have mentioned, which is this might be an undue burden. This might be something that could actually destroy a big industry that we depend on in California. In fact, if you would, Kevin, go to the list of donors. This is a public list that's maintained because this is how things work in the state of California. If you have a pact against a bill, you have to expose. You have to tell people who's giving you money. And it's a who's who of tech companies. And yes, you've got Cox and you've got Comcast, but you also have Microsoft. You've got Amazon. You've got Google. You've got Facebook. You've got Apple. So, I mean, these are companies that most of the time have fallen on the right side of history here. And if they're against it, there's a good reason they're against it. And it's not because they want the right to sell your information to whomever without you knowing. It's because, as has been brought up several times, if you're going to do that in just one state, they're just going to move their business out of the state. It's too expensive. And as Curtis mentioned, it might be impossible for them to backwards engineer that now. Lou, let me bring this over to you. Is this just an issue of it being a state law? if this was a federal policy, if the FCC policies had remained in effect to do the same thing that this law is doing, would that be better, or would it just be a bad thing on a larger scale?
I think my opinion is that it would probably be just scale the issue. I think at this point, I think that you already have businesses that are going to have issues with paying the extra money to track the data and to make sure that they're handling the rules that are being applied by this particular act. But then they have to scale that across the nation to every state, to every scenario where they potentially give data to a customer or to an advertiser, that's no matter what state they're in. I think that not only that is going to be hard to track, like everyone else has already pointed out, and that'll be super expensive for them to track, but it'll also have to be that they're going to have to tag data, understand where that data goes, and so on and so forth. I think it's just going to be a scale issue across the board.
Yeah, I think so. Well, that's definitely not the last we're going to hear about this. It has received enough signatures to go on the ballot in California in November, so we're going to find out. My guess is because they've got so much of a war chest, people will be informed about this, and they're probably going to vote it down. I know there's a tendency to say, well, privacy's good, but this is one of these laws that I think was written with very good intents. They even looked at future enforcement of the law, so it's not just teethless words, but maybe they need to give it a better look as to the actual feasibility. Bring in some IT companies and say, we understand you're not trying to be nefarious, but what's the best way to guarantee consumer privacy without destroying the business model that's been driving the economy recently?